So we've kind of been making videos about the New York Rangers and everybody. Yesterday it was Jake Chychrun, 2 days ago it was Luke Schenn. This conversation, though, and everything we're talking about today, has actually been on the chopping block for a few days now. And it actually precedes the conversations we had about Chychrun and Schenn chronology-wise. It's just, there were other topics that I felt were kind of important too, which is why this kind of got pushed down the totem pole in terms of importance, but now, because there have been explorations done of those other topics, I think we could talk about this one right here. Let's talk about Frank Seravalli and what he had to say about the New York Rangers and their apparent interest in Artturi Lehkonen. Montreal Canadiens forward, overall versatile winger, speedy guy, he's a quick guy, he's a guy who scored a pretty important goal, sending the Canadiens to the Stanley Cup Finals, and he is indeed one of these other pieces that are being discussed in trade talks. Why? Here's why. Artturi Lehkonen is a 26-year-old, 5'11", 179-pound left winger, making $2.3 million a season till the end of this year. This contract he's on is actually 1 year long. He signed it last offseason after coming off a 2-year, $2.4 million cap hit contract. And because this year he is indeed expiring, and the Canadiens are pretty bad, there is an entire idea going around saying that Artturi Lehkonen could be seen as a pretty good trade candidate and a rental for anybody looking to add to their playoff squads. He's got 15 points in 37 games played this season, which isn't amazing, but you know, there's a lot of versatility that Artturi Lehkonen adds to a lineup, so there is a lot more value to be had than just point production alone. And so, we go over onto what Frank Seravalli had to say about Artturi Lehkonen, his services, as well as what that could mean for the trade block. Take a look at this. There is a clip posted on the Daily Face-Off show talking about the biggest name the Montreal Canadiens will move before the trade deadline being question mark. It's a segment where all three of the guys are talking, and there is indeed a little piece that Frank Seravalli has to say about Artturi Lehkonen. Let's go over onto NHLTradeTalk.com, where we talk about how teams are begging the Canadiens to trade Lehkonen and how that could equal a big return. A link will be in the description if you want to go ahead and read this. Included in the article is indeed the Daily Face-Off video that I was talking about. And what the article does well is it transcribes what exactly it is Frank Seravalli is saying. As per Seravalli of Daily Face-Off, Artturi Lehkonen is in incredibly high demand. The pending RFA is playing in the final season of his career. Yeah, we talked about that already. Versatile as a forward as any in this year's trade market, yada yada yada. He noted on an episode of DFO Rundown, the player I believe most in demand from the Montreal Canadiens right now is Artturi Lehkonen. Teams see Lehkonen as this year's version of Blake Coleman. The scouting report on Lehkonen is that he does everything well, except finish, which is ironic because he's Finnish. And that's the guy that teams are really after to get. I know at least 3 teams that are begging the Montreal Canadiens to try and get Lehkonen. Take a look at that, eh? 3 teams that are at the very least begging, that's the word he uses, begging the Canadiens to give up Artturi Lehkonen in a trade-like scenario. Now, it kind of rubs me the wrong way when I think about the idea of Artturi Lehkonen being this year's version of Blake Coleman of all people. If we go over to Blake Coleman and see what he was up to before he got traded over to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the trade, which ultimately had that Vancouver first sent over, he was in a position where he had 31 points in 57 games played. He was a near 40-point guy the previous season in 2018-19, and I don't know, Artturi Lehkonen has not really eclipsed the 31-point mark in a full 82-game season, so I don't really know. Blake Coleman also had 21 goals the year he got traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning. I mean, Artturi Lehkonen had 18 in his rookie season in 2016-17, so maybe there's a little bit more of a similarity than I thought there was, but at face value, I didn't really think that Coleman would have been the immediate comparable for Lehkonen, but seeing as Coleman did indeed get the New Jersey Devils a first-round pick that happened to be Vancouver's, which eventually turned out to be Shakir Mukhamadullin, I'd be very happy to see if Artturi Lehkonen could get the Montreal Canadiens a first-round pick as well, especially if teams are begging Kent Hughes to go out there and make a move with this name. Now, begging is a great word, and I've been using that word a lot because I want to hammer that point home. When you are begging somebody to do something for you, that other party has the power. You are the ones who are at their mercy because you're trying to say, okay, look, I really need you to do this. You can go ahead and do whatever it is that you want, but at least try doing this because it would help me out greatly. There's a power dynamic there that doesn't exist if you just try to use the word, oh, they're conversing about Lehkonen, oh, they're just kind of floating his name around in talks. No, teams are begging the Canadiens to trade for this guy. And what that ultimately means is that teams are taking a look at Lehkonen and saying, okay, he's a good player. We could probably use him in the playoffs right now. He scored that really good goal to send the Canadiens to the finals, but also he is only 26 years old, and he is an RFA, so there is indeed likely the possibility that Artturi Lehkonen does sign a contract extension with whichever team it is acquires his services and plays him in the 2022 Stanley Cup playoffs. This doesn't really appear to be a pure rental situation where it is just, okay, they're getting a guy, they're using him for a month, and then they're letting him go to free agency. Because he's an RFA, he very well could be re-signed, and maybe that even adds a certain amount of value that Coleman did not have when the Devils traded him away back in 2020? I completely forgot. And so we go further into this article on NHLTradeTalk.com. Arthur Staple of The Athletic reports on this article that requires a subscription. A link will be in the description to this as well. He noted that New York Rangers, by the way, Arthur Staples of The Athletic reports noted that proofread your stuff, please, NHLTradeTalk.com. But Staple has pointed out that New York Rangers GM Chris Drury has reached out to Canadiens Executive Vice President of Hockey Ops Jeff Gorton to discuss Lehkonen's availability. Keep in mind, the Rangers are believed to be in on just about every big name available, and those discussions are being billed as preliminary right now. And so here we go again. The Rangers are involved in yet another trade discussion for another player on the market. And there isn't really any confirmation or no real confirmation. Yeah, that's the worst word that I could have used in that context. There's no real sentiment that says that the Rangers would be willing to give up a first-round pick or anything of that nature for an Artturi Lehkonen. All we know from Staple in his article on The Athletic is just that the Rangers have snooped around and they've conversed about it. Now, whether or not that means something to you, it really depends, but if we talk about the idea of Artturi Lehkonen getting added onto a Rangers team that does indeed have another Finn on their squad in Capo Caco, it does make for a pretty interesting combination, especially when you take a look at the style the Rangers play the game. They like to play high-octane offensive hockey, and Artturi Lehkonen is pretty good when you throw him out there and you tell him, okay, go, here it goes again. Make a play, drive the net, score a goal, do whatever it is. Artturi Lehkonen is pretty good at following simplistic instructions like that. And so, especially under a system with Gerard Gallant in charge, I definitely do think that the Rangers could see a lot of value in a player like Artturi Lehkonen, considering what he was able to do last season in the postseason when the Canadiens went to the finals. He only had 4 points in 17 games, but as we have noted several times talking about many people in the Canadiens' final run, there were a lot of guys who underproduced in those playoff series, yet still had very important impacts on that team. And I think that could be said about pretty much everybody, right? Like, there weren't too many guys producing a whole bunch of points aside from Suzuki, yet everybody was so important. And it was that teamwork, that cohesion that really allowed the Canadiens to go as far as they did. Unfortunately, they lost in 5 games in the finals, of course. We all kind of remember that. But now, Artturi Lehkonen, being on the block, is trying to see if he can replicate that same level of success with some other team. If teams are willing to go out there and pay a first, hey, be my guest. If the Rangers are going to go out there and pay a first, hey, that would be kind of surprising. But assuming the Rangers actually do go far in this year's playoffs, I would be pretty okay with that. It all depends, though, right? Because there is an extra season's worth of RFA eligibility for Artturi Lehkonen in his contract, which means that any team that's acquiring this guy is likely acquiring him to re-sign him as well. This isn't really a traditional rental situation, which makes the entire evaluation of his value... yeah, okay, great language right there, Lego Rocks. The evaluation of his talent and what he should be worth in the market, it makes things a little bit more difficult and non-standard compared to other regular trade deadline pickups. So talk to me in the comments, what do you think about the idea of an Artturi Lehkonen trade, and the Rangers specifically being the team that have been asking around about him, that has been labeled in the media. If you're a Rangers fan, what is the most you would give up for an Artturi Lehkonen kind of player? And would you rather get a guy like Phil Kessel instead, or a forward like Riley Smith instead, or a forward like Tyler Toffoli instead, or a JT Miller instead? Depending on the price, depending on what exactly it is you guys need filled up in your lineup, I could totally see why you could say, okay, I would want this other player instead of Artturi Lehkonen, or I'd rather get to Foley instead, because he's also in the Canadiens, and we're talking about potential Rangers acquisitions up on forward. Or you would rather just say, okay, I'd save my picks and try to get Chychrun or whatever. Talk to me in the comments on your thoughts about this idea. Hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.